anniversary waltz. to run, because I run in elections. I like doing that. And the first article was King of the Fringe, because I'm in the Guinness Book of Records for running in more elections and losing more elections than anyone else. So anyway, I showed up at a meeting. It was run by Rogers, and I wasn't invited. They said, you can't answer any questions. Well, I dealt with people like that before, and I said, I don't care, I'm going to stay. He said, you got to go. I said, I'm staying. He said, we're going to call the police. I said, go ahead. I've done this before. So anyway, police escort candidate from debate. Imagine that. There's another picture of me. Well, what happened was Rogers was taping it, and CPAC and Ottawa were taping it. So here I am for 25 minutes standing in front of the stage, not letting them start their show. So they're pretty mad. It's going on live on TV. They cut the audio so nobody can hear what's going on until the police arrive. Now the funny story is the moderator, the guy who said I couldn't answer the questions, just the big four parties, he grabbed my briefcase from behind me and started to take off with it. So I got up, I grabbed it, I'm getting in a tug of war, but I can't spend a lot of time with him. So what I do is, when he's tugging and I'm tugging, I pull myself forward, get my leg behind him, and then I give him a good push, and he goes flying right across the stage with the handle of my bag. But I kept my briefcase. So the editor who reported the story says, Turmel retrieved his briefcase. Yeah. He didn't mention me flipping the moderator across the room to get it. So anyway, finally, there we got Jiu-Jitsu John, and in come the Fort Guelph police. Okay, because the moderators want to take me away. So, it's me and the Fort Guelph police, and Rogers cuts the commercial. Well, anyway, they did a whole story about how can Rogers cut the commercial when the police are coming in and taking the candidate away. So they did. Anyway, that's more stories about what they did and how they got a phone call from Ottawa saying, hey, can you bury the story about Turmel? And they said, no, we can't bury the story. And they wrote a story about the guys in Ottawa trying to kill the story. What an adventure. So anyway, then they aborted the by-election. Oh, the next night I went back. Another meeting I wasn't invited to. I told the moderators, add a chair or call the cops. They said, okay, we'll add a chair. And I got on the debate. So in that whole election with 5 meetings, I got to participate in every meeting but the one. But they know if they don't let me speak, I do this every time. If you're going to have a show and you're going to influence the voters and you're not going to let me play, I'm going to come and I'm going to make you take me away every time. So anyway, that's the by-election. I'll tell you about the election next break. All right, revenge. We'll go to the Moulin Rouge, visit the Can-Can, and we'll contemplate La Vie en Rose. sur le Pont d'Avignon. So here we visit France. But Moulin Rouge first, can-can dancers, right? Anybody want to get up, three ladies, and take arms and do can-can? We're at Amber Lea on October 7, 2008. All right, here we go. Grazie.
Drink to the oil with thine eyes, and springtime in the Rockies. Really old ones. Here we go.
play some Scottish music. We'll play the Black Bear Highlander song, Long Way to Tiperary, oh, English Country Garden, Loch Lomond, and the religious one at the end. All right. Cumparsita. themselves in the newspapers, is Turmel going to run in Brantford or is he going to run in Guelph? Well, the last time I ran in Brantford, that was last municipal election, and let's see now, where is it? Way back in here. It wasn't much fun because the police took me away again. Here's a picture of me. This was at the Rogers debate. And I showed them this little sticker here. My software. It's interest-free banking software. And the moderator ordered the police to throw me out for wearing my party sticker. Now tonight in Guelph, I decided to run in Guelph. They're having another meeting, and it's run by Rogers again, and they're saying no party stickers. Well, I'm wearing my party sticker, and let's see if they bring the cops again. But anyway, this was at the Rogers debate. Then at the board at the Chamber of Commerce, they excluded me too. And you can see here's a picture of the police officer telling me I can't participate in the debate. So my 4 opponents are up there, and they get to answer all the questions, and I'm sitting down in the audience. Well, near the end, I made a bit of a ruckus, and the officer had to ask me to leave. So that was the second time I was put out. Third time now, at the high school, they bring all the adult students over to Pauline Johnson. And then the principal sends me a letter and says, if you come to the debate, we're going to charge you with trespassing. So I showed up, and there are the cops. So anyway, 3 times the cops wouldn't let me speak in the debate. And then at the Grant University Women's Association, they said I was banned because I'm an independent. So, 4th, and I made them bring the cops again. I always do this. You want to cheat me, you're going to have to make a maximum force to meet my maximum civil disobedience. So I decided to run in Guelph because it looked like I was going to get to participate in more debates over there. They had too many cops to stop me in Brantford. So I'm running in Guelph right now. Anyway, everything's going fine. First university debate, I'm invited. The next debate after that, I'm invited. Then I go to a high school, and I get in here and I'm told, oh, you're not invited. So I do the same thing again, and there's a picture of me standing on stage in front of the big 4 candidates with a police officer down front calling in reinforcements. Jiu-Jitsu John's on stage again. So anyway, the police came and they ordered me to leave, and I did. And I, stalled the debate for 15 minutes. So anyway, 2 more debates to go tonight, and after that I got invited. So imagine how many times I have to be taken into custody because they're not going to allow all the candidates to speak at the debates. So there's something wrong with our system when I keep getting arrested and all I want to do is, I'm a candidate. I want to go to the meeting and I want to answer the questions. And I keep getting arrested and taken away. There's something wrong with that. Anyway, tonight, the big fight. Remember now, Tim Philp, Führer Philp I call him, he ordered the police to take me off the show because I showed them my little left sticker. Well, I'm wearing it tonight, and I already told them I was going to wear it. So I wonder if they're going to be ready with the cops to take me away if I show my sticker. Gypsy music, getting ready for tonight. There could be some action in Guelph. 2 guitars. And these are bugles and trumpets blaring, big fanfares. Here we go. Remember, it's going to be loud. And remember, the matador is proudly marching.
Jealousie, that weird thing called jealousy. Here we go. Jealousy.
Adventures, my favorite. Let's see if I get it right. So I